Good afternoon and welcome to another ESU 8 webinar. This afternoon we'll be discussing MAP 101. Basically, this is a very basic course of the understanding what MAP actually is and what the parts and the functions of those parts actually are. I have with me this afternoon Jill Bates.
Hi.
And we'll be working through this, and we appreciate having you with us this afternoon. When you're thinking about MAP, and many of you have been giving MAPS tests for either several years or just recently started giving MAPS tests, and you all have different amounts of awareness. Right now on the screen that you see, we have four basics. I'm aware, I understand, I can apply, and I can teach others. And what Jill and I want you to do this afternoon is, where are you on this continuum? Where do you fit? Aware, understand, apply, or teach others? Now think about this as we go through our whole presentation this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about things that you may or may not already know about MAP. We're going to start with an adaptive assessment. MAP is what they call an adaptive assessment, and it, as you answer questions, it adapts to what your needs are. We have a little video that we want to share with you before we go any deeper into this that helps explain the adaptive assessment idea.
Your map test is kind of like shooting basketball.
But the issue, okay, I just wanted to make sure I could do that.
Now go back.
Okay, as you can see, as from Mr. Taylor's or Dr. Taylor's example, that as we want, as a student takes an assessment, we can see that watch the marks as they come over here into the where the map test is being taken. You see the minus signs; those indicate items that the student has missed. Now watch. Did you see how the student has got correct one, incorrect, correct, incorrect, correct, and so on and so forth? So what this has done is as adjusted as the student has answered the questions as to whether the items get harder or the items continue to be a little bit easier for what the student already knows and is able to do. You also notice that the RIT score of 195 is available to tell where that student's level of average performance for that assessment was falling.
So Deb, when I look at that specific slide that you have there and I see that blue band beside the 6th grade.
Yes, right here.
That has some special significance, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. That's where an average, a normed 6th grader will actually achieve within that band. From the low part of the band up to the high part of the band is where the student will
So
be.
if we look at the first question that was given with that first minus, that was right at that normed 6th grade level of questioning, and the student missed that question, so it got a little bit easier, and that overall RIT score of 195 theoretically would be below the 6th grade normed RIT band. Is that correct?
Right. And anytime a student takes a test, they're always going to start at their grade level norm.
Right.
And then move either down or up depending upon their answers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what a RIT scale actually is. Actually, it's a really simple tool to use. It's it's like a yardstick in that every inch is an inch all the way out up through the 36 inches that are there. As you can see here, it's used to show growth over time. And we're going to be thinking again about This little star shows where that 196 was on that 6th grade student that we just visited with him, just saw his results on there. So what it tells us that he is at the 3rd level of this particular test in the that a RIT band actually has, this one has between 120 and 250 intervals. So the 196 falls right here where the star.
Okay, we need to stop right now because we're going to edit this out.
I made a mistake.
Yeah, this is for a 3rd grader who is in that RIT band.
Yes, I heard that. Let's go back.
So we just did that.
So we just did
and
that.
I said thank you, and then you start here.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about the Rasch instructional unit, or the RIT scale. Mr. Rasch is an actual man who invented this scale, and it's an equal interval scale of achievement, and it's used to show how what growth there is over time of a student, and it's completely independent of the grade level. It happens. It's where the student scores between, in this case, 120 and 250. This shows us on the gray band from the light colored kindergarten to 10th grade where an average student might perform. Right here, we're looking at a 3rd grade RIT, and what we have to the right of this bar is the RIT skills data, or the Descartes, or the primary instructional data. Now, what the Descartes, or the primary instructional data, does is tell you exactly what the student is ready for instruction today, what they actually are able to do up to 75% of the time.
So if we look at that Descartes over to the side, and I see that star by the student who is a 3rd grader, the skills and concepts to develop where he's ready for instruction today would be the middle band, which would be between 161 to 170, and the skills to introduce would be between 171 and 180.
Exactly, Jill. You're very much correct. Those bands, that's what those bands describe. Now, this is another way of looking at a RIT score over time. What we have identified here is a 4th grade RIT score of a 199.6, and these are fall reading averages. As we watch how this student has grown, he moves all the way up to 207.1 as a 5th grader. Look how he's grown as a 6th grader, now as a 7th, as an 8th, 9th, and a 10th grader. Now, what is important to notice about these is that notice how much wider, or how many more points there are between a 4th grade achievement and 5th grade achievement, from a 199.6 to a 207. And then notice when you look at the 9th grade and 10th grade that the amount of growth that the student has had is far less, 221.4 to 223.2. We only see approximately 2.5 points worth of growth, where at the 4th to 5th grade, we're looking at approximately about 40 points worth of growth, 30 to 40 points worth of growth. 20.
8.
From 190, oh, it's 8. Oh my God. Okay, we'll edit that out too. From 196, 199.6 in 4th grade to 205, the student has 8 growth points, average growth there, whereas in 9th and 10th grade, we're only seeing about 2 to 2.5 points.
So Deb, is that unusual for students to grow much more in the elementary grades than they do as they reach high school?
Right, it is. It's far more common for them gain have larger gains as they're younger. You have to think about the fact that they're learning so much more, they're gaining so many more skills and content. Whereas when we get up into the, you notice how it slows down more 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, and that's because the students have gotten to a maturity level in their learning and their knowing and doing uh, abilities, so that and many times what's interesting about with the fact that the point spread or the point growth isn't quite as far apart is that upper level students, they get disappointed with themselves that they aren't seeing the amount of growth that they're having as when they were younger students. Well, it's just like when we grow in our height, when we take the time to mark in that doorway. When we're very young, we can see growth of 4 to 5 inches in 1 year, whereas as we get older and mature, we're only seeing maybe an inch or less than an inch every year until we reach our full adult height. And the same thing happens with our education and the knowledge that we gain and be able to use them within our life.
It's a good analogy. I like that.
Oh,
Especially
great.
when you're looking at RIT scores. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So what we're looking at down here is a page from the Descartes underneath that RIT scale, horizontal RIT scale. And as you notice that this student's 10th grade is a 223.2. And the RIT band that's in the middle of this page is from 221 to 230. And that student falls within that range right there. You notice that there are skills below from 211 to 220. Those are the concepts and the skills that the student is going to be able to know and do. The blue ones right here, we just talked about those. Those are the things that he's ready for instruction for today on. And the ones that are 211 to 220 are skills that they've already had instruction on, have some mastery of, and they'll have great success with those. Now, the skills that are located above in the 230 to 240 range, why those skill contents and skills are things that we can move towards. They only know about 25% of those particular indicators that are underneath there, but those are things that they will learn in the future as they grow and continue to move to the right. It's always move to the right, move to the right, move to the right. Let's talk a little bit about normative data. Now, the MAP test is normed, and several thousand students are used in the norming process. The last norming process was done in 2011, and we're up for a new norming scale in 2014, 2015. But this is the one we use right now. Now, what this scale talks about, and it's very important, is that we notice that it is about typical performance of a student. You notice down the left side we have the grade levels, and then across the top we have, it's the beginning of the year mean. Mean means average, don't forget. The middle of the year mean and the end of the year mean. So what this means is that a student that takes the assessment, let's talk about a third grader in this case, if they take the MAP assessment at the beginning of the year, you might expect a typical student to get a 189.9. And if we take it in the middle of the year, or what we typically call a winter testing situation, that typical performance, we might see a student gain about 6 points up to 194.6. And if we go further and do a spring test, ideally MAP tests are taken 3 times a year, 2 times a year are most usual within ESU 8. But we'll notice that student from 194.6 to 199.2, it's an approximate 5-point gain. Now notice, though, 5-point gain on an average typical. But notice when you look at the fourth grade beginning of the year, do you notice how close the end of the year mean and the beginning of the year mean are between third and fourth grade? Many teachers have talked to us over time about the fact that they're concerned about how much learning students uh, forget over the summer months. And what this study has shown us is that typically students really stay pretty close on track.
Another thing that I find very interesting about these reading norms is if I look at kindergarten and I look at the beginning of the year mean to the end of the year mean, that's over 15 RIT points. But if I look down at 11th grade, it's 0.3 RIT score, increase in the RIT score.
Right. Yes, that's very correct.
Another thing, a question that I have for you, Deb, that some of our listeners might be wondering, if I look at a fifth grade student and the beginning of the year mean for reading is 207.1, is that the same mean for math?
Oh, no. There are individual means, norm studies and means for math, for science, for language usage. You have to make sure you're looking at the correct mean norm, status norm scale in order to be able to identify where the students are. Because for the lowest possible score to the highest possible score for each is uh, select very individual.
Okay, so if I were that fifth grade student, I might have a RIT score of 2000 or 207 in reading, and I might have a 223 in math.
Yes, and you could even have a 212 like in science.
Sure. Okay.
You could be, and we're going to talk about that a little bit deeper a little
Okay.
bit later. That's a good question to ask, Jill. I'm glad you did that. These questions that we have right here are what are expected RIT and growth scores. That's what the normative is. Those are kind of what's expected to happen. But remember, we're only talking about typical growth. Nothing is expected. It is always typical. We have normative data for grades K through 12, and they have scale alignment studies that they use that aligns that RIT scale with state proficiency, even for Nebraska. Many of our states across our United States have our own state proficiency benchmark scale scores, which is really interesting because we can know a student, it offers you a predictability as to whether or not the student will be proficient on the state exam.
It's great information.
And those NWA goal structures are very important. They give us a lot of information about what's happening with our students when we look at the results of this test. And here we have this right here. Here is our students. Here's our sample size that was used in mathematics. You can look at that. Percent of students who pass. Past status was accurately predicted by their map performance. Look at this. We have in the mid 80s in mathematics and the low to mid 80s within reading. So we have, this is really interesting.
So if I look at that and I look under mathematics for seventh grade,
sure.
What I can ascertain from this chart is that MAP accurately predicted how 86% of my students would perform on NISA.
Right, and it's important to note that it only underestimated on 6.9%. Now there's close to 1,000 students. So basically what we can say right here is that it was very insignificant, the number of students that underperformed.
And about the equal amount overperformed too. So exactly. 86% accuracy.
86% accuracy. Okay. That is really exciting. Okay. All right, let's talk about instructional readiness. Remember when we talked about the Descartes, we talked about the RIT band where the student performs within that. Let's say the student is at a 199.6, okay, on their average, and they're going to be in a RIT band that's from 191 to 200. So that gives information right there, if you look at that, as to what the instructional level is of the student. And it gives us a roadmap for students towards achieving their mastery, because the RIT band to the right of where the student is always going to be a mastery level, working towards those new things. And but it's real important to understand that the MAP test is not a mastery of skills. You know, the other, it's about growth. How are these students moving more towards learning all of the skills that are available, not just what's predicted or prescribed for any particular grade level or grade group.
So it's more of an instructional tool, a tool to help you guide your instruction, and not a test for determining mastery.
You are so right. You're so right. This is a tool that gives us instructional data. So here, let's look at this again. So remember, we talked about the Rasch unit, and that's Rasch instruction unit, or ready for instruction today. Here we have a RIT score in the orange star of 195. Now notice right next to it, there is a column from the Descartes, and the range, if you look up here, is 191 to 200. So within this range, these are just some samples of the indicators that are found within that RIT range. Identifies words with the same vowel sound, determines which word contains a given number of syllables. All of those kinds of things that this student is ready for instruction today. They're ready to learn it. They have mastered the skills underneath to the left, and this is right where they are. Here we have a little broader page. This is exactly what I was talking about before. Here we have this student, and we're in the subject of reading, and we're going to look at word analysis and vocabulary development. Now, here's the RIT range of that student that we were looking at before, right in at the 191 to 200 RIT range. Again, remember that these are the indicators. These are the that the student is ready for instruction today. And here we have to the right are the next skills that the student is going to need to know and be able to do. And also to the left of this at the 181 to the 190, this particular student has mastered many or most of these particular skills. Okay, let's look at the Descartes. We looked at the Descartes, so we have had, let's go through this again. This is a Descartes for a primary grades instructional, and usually these are kindergarten through grade 2 assessments. The RIT band is located right up along here. Remember, it's 181 to 190 again. And here this happens to be for the subject level of math in the goal strand area of algebra. So these are all the things where they're ready for instruction today on.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about the teacher report.
Yeah, I think we'll just do that. Here we go. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how you access the teacher report. Of course, naturally, first you have to have to log in. And to log in, you have to have your username and your password. If you don't have your username or your password close to you, contact your district assessment coordinator. They'll have that information for you. Once you've logged in, you'll see this page that we have right here in front of us now. We're going to look at the teacher report today, and the teacher report gives us information about our whole class. So once we've clicked on teacher reports, this page comes up, and we need to first of all select term, and then we need to select the radio button, view by RIT scores, and naturally the submit button. And then what we have come up after we've selected the term and the goal scores is a sheet that looks like this. This is very representative of every teacher report that we see. This teacher report has a lot of information on it. And we're going to take you through a teacher report here just to give you an idea of what there actually is. If you'll follow the bright yellow highlights, first of all, it identifies who the teacher is, what class, that this is a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade exploratory class of this teacher that we're looking at. The next highlight, you'll notice there are 15 students in this particular group, and that the test dates when the students took these assessments are listed also. Now notice that not all the students took the test on the same day. This testing window started on or about April 22nd and then closed on May 10th. So not all of your students have to take the test on the very same day. This was a spring reading test that they took. That's always found up at the very top center on the page. And then what's interesting about this is that if you look at this, all of these students are arranged by RIT score from the lowest score to the highest score. Now remember, that's their average for this spring reading test. We had one student that was in gray up here, and down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's an explanation as to why that student was in gray. This student was excluded from the summary statistics. Either there was something happened during the testing period that the proctor or the test monitor stopped the test. But if you'll notice that right above the grade 1, that student had another opportunity to take that assessment. Now, it's perfectly legal in order to stop a test and start a test, especially if you know that the student is not not paying close attention to how they're answering or taking it as seriously as they should, or maybe there was just something that happened within the session, so you just terminate that session and then you just start all over again with another ticket for that particular student. Those gray lines are not included in any of the mean, standard deviation, or median calculations either. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the list of each of the strands of the test, the reading tests that they took, and the names of those tests. And then down here, in the read a variety of materials, the standard deviation of the students who took that assessment was 18.0. What that means, the larger the number, it means the wider the spread between the students from and how they performed. If you notice, we actually can look and see that Trina Driftmeyer, she is the lowest of those students. And then we have a student down here called Charlene Bolins Lund. She's in the 235, 250. What happens there is 18 happens. The standard deviation is broader.
So it goes all the way from a low of 155 to a high of 250, which would be 95, potentially 95 points difference
Right.
in the RIT scores of the students, those 15 students who took this test.
Oh, yes, very much so, which translates then into a standard deviation of 18.
Right. So mathematically, using some kind of formula, the standard deviation is 18.0.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
You notice when we look at read, recognize literature that the standard deviation of the students is much smaller at only 10.4 as compared with the 18. You actually want, it's most desirable to have your students clustered together closer. We're going to look at another report later that'll help us understand what these deviations actually how it looks when we're looking into class. Okay, we also, on a teacher report, we can see the mean of the class for each of the goal performance assessments that they took. For locate, select, and use info, the average score of the 15 students that took this test is a 217.7. You can see that for each of the 4 goal performance tests there. That's information that's important to know too. And what's interesting here is that you notice that for each of the means of each of the 4 goal performance assessments, students average about the same. But we have to be careful that we don't just look at the mean as any kind of, because as Jill stated earlier, we have a variance on the first assessment in the goal performance of 155 all the way up to 250, but it averages. We also can look at the median score. Now remember, the median score is the score that occurs most frequently within.
It's the score right in the middle.
Oh, that's right. It is the score right in the middle. That's right. Median means the middle. I have to think about that. And if we look at those median scores too, that's the mode I was talking about.
Right.
The median scores here are very close as well. So when we look at the overall reading test that was given to these students, their mean RIT, or their average RIT score, was a 217.6. And their median score, right down the middle, was a 218. But notice that their standard deviation for the whole test, for the whole assessment, is a 12.99. Now that is an average of the standard deviations of all 4 of the assessments in the reading section of this. So they're a little bit closer than they are far away. But when you look at the standard deviation of each test, you can notice that they are different. They are pretty far apart. Here's what we were talking about on this standard deviation. Now, Jill, remember here's the standard deviation of 21. Here we have Justin, who's at a 181 to a 190, and we have Taylor and Sarah, who are all the way up here at 231 to 240 rather. And the deviation here means that it's equal to a 21. Look how far these students are spread apart. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different overall RIT score ranges that you're working with, from 181 90 to 231 40. That's pretty broad. Now, let's look at this one. Notice here how the students are closer together. That we have from 201 to 201 to 210 and 222 to 230. The students are much closer. Look at the standard deviation here is only 8. We want to make sure that the standard deviation of our students, let's look back here again. This is 21 and this is 8. Which class would you rather teach?
Well, obviously, I'd rather teach this class where I didn't have to differentiate everything, where I could do whole group instruction.
That's exactly right, because when you have a class that's deviated this far apart, well, you're going to have to think about doing some groupings and perhaps some differentiated instruction.
And when we talk with teachers, a lot of times they tell us that this is their favorite RIT report.
Yes, and you get to this RIT report right here. This is the favorite because this really tells them a lot of information about their students. So again, you've logged in, used your password, and gone in and requested this report. Now, when you request this report, you have to identify what testing season you want to look at too, spring, fall, winter. But you come up with this report that looks like this. And what's important about this is that across the top again are the various RIT ranges. Down the left side are the subject areas. And then we can see in each subject, I'm just going to take math across the top because it reads real clear across the top. We can see that these students range from a 181 all the way up to a 251 plus. These students, while they're clustered in the middle at 201 to 220 and maybe even up to 230, they are rather diversified on the left end of the chart that we're looking at, the report we're looking at right here is up to the GI Givens up here at 251.
So if I look at that one and I see that they range across 8 different RIT bands,
Yeah,
this would be a class that would have a very large standard deviation for that specific test.
definitely be.
Mhm.
I would say this would probably be 20 plus
Right.
standard deviation. And you know what, Jill? I think if you look at the reading, see how they're spread across there also.
Mhm.
They're in
7.
7 different RIT bands. And then in language usage, they're only in 6 different RIT bands. Do you suppose that every student performs the same in the same RIT band every time they perform?
That's a very, very good question.
I don't know.
I wonder if we could take a look at a report and trace that.
Okay, let's see. Let's see what we can do. Okay, let's look at T.A. Driftmeyer first. Let's highlight him. Okay, here's where he, oh my goodness, Jill. Okay, we have math, reading, language usage, general science, and concepts and processes. Huh. Oh, here's a
Okay.
T.A. Driftmeyer up here that got missed. Look at this student. Claire up here in the RIT band 231, 240.
Okay, so if we look at mathematics in the RIT band 231 to 240, T.A. Driftmeyer is the first name listed up there.
Listed up there.
So that student does very well in math on the RIT or on the MAP test, but in reading, language usage, general science, and concepts and processes, his RIT score would have been the lowest.
Exactly. Here, since we missed TA up in mathematics, we thought the red circle indicates what his highest score was from just looking at the 4 that we have highlighted. And his lowest score is in the blue box, which is in general science. Now, take into consideration when you're looking at 231 to that 240 in mathematics. Here we go. In mathematics, there you go. He's very high, very high. But look where he is in general science. Interesting. So his learning goes across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different RIT bands. Interesting. Okay, let's look at another student. This is AA Do Not. He is light green. And Jill, what do you notice about AA?
I notice he's primarily kind of in the middle of the class in math and in reading, lower to middle in language usage, and then towards the bottom on the RIT score in general science and concepts and processes.
Jill, what's his best subject?
His best subject would be math.
You're right.
And the lowest would be general science and concepts and processes. Yeah. In fact, I noticed when I look at that, the whole class appears to do well in math.
Yes, they do. As a whole, as a class, too, when you look at this, they're all to the right, aren't they? Yeah, that's an interesting class. Okay, let's look at another student. Okay, this is M.W. McGallis. And when we look at M.W. McGallis, we look at, now watch, what's happened? This whole student has, again, moved to the right in all of their, and stayed to the right of where the whole of the class or the larger numbers of the class actually are. So it's kind of interesting. Again, their best subject is mathematics, with their weakest subject being concepts and processes. Wow. We looked at 3 different students. And remember, we talked about the average RIT score for this group was what, 2.8? The median was 218. Wow, look at that. We have students that are all over.
218 for reading.
218 for reading. That'd be right here. That would be right here. Let's move this a little bit. In this area right here, in this concept of reading, which is this box right here.
Right.
Yeah. But look where the students are. It's really interesting. You have that. Let's try one more student. Okay, this is A.N. Tenora. And this student is just a little bit, in my mind, a little bit more spread out in their learning. Because very strong in math. That would be their best subject. But strong in reading and in language usage. But look what happens here. And look what happens here.
Again, the lowest score is in science.
Yeah, the lowest scores in science. Wow. Oh, excuse me. I didn't want to quite take you there. Because we have the lowest score is in science. All right. So what we really want to look at next is the idea that while we have all of these students, let's look at just in reading, since we were talking about reading earlier, let's look at here, we're about done. This is a Descartes, and we have taken those classroom students, and we have done post-it stickers, and put their names on. Here's our little T.A. Driftmeyer student, and here's our McGallis and Border students. And this wristband says above 230. Remember, they scored in the 230 to the 240 plus. But look at how your students, when you lay them on the Descartes, remember where their sticky is, that's where they're ready for instruction today.
I really like this. I like using that last report to see where students are, where your whole class is visually, and then putting those names from those wristbands on a post-it note and posting it on the Descartes so you can see exactly what they need to learn.
Exactly. We go from this, which is just a list of names, to a list with actual skills identified.
Love it. I love it.
It is. It's a real. This really helps teachers. Students understand and teachers understand as well where they are and where they need to go. Okay. Now it's time for you to look at your own data. Let me get rid of this little guy here. If you want to, this is where you can get the information on the NWEA site. This PowerPoint, you'll need your user and your password for that. You get the teacher report, the class breakdown. These are all reports we looked at today. Class breakdown by goal, and the Descartes is available there too. All valuable things for you to look at. Now, what we do want to invite you to is the ESU 8 Staff Development Wiki. By accessing our web homepage and going to select under the tag of Department, Staff Development, you can select the Wiki, and it takes you right to a blue bar where you find NWE Map. You know, Jill, if you just click on that, you can come right to this page. And if you want to re-listen or relearn or just watch through the slides again yourself, there's a link down at the bottom of this very page, this picture that you look at, that you can just click on and go right to that.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jill and I really want to thank you all for being with us. And we want you to think about these things as you plan forward. What will you do with the information that you learned from today? How will you approach implementation? Who will be involved? And most of all, when are you going to try it? We really encourage you, if you have any further questions or comments, or maybe you're a little bit nervous about doing it, get in contact with us. We'll be glad to come out and help you and sit right beside you and get you started on this. With that, we thank you for your attention and we wish you well as you work hard.